Maria laughed cruelly, shears poised. "Please, cleaner, don't cut my hair," Lily begged. What her father saw and shouted froze Maria's laugh forever. David Thorne, a titan of industry whose name echoed in the gilded halls of finance, found himself stepping off his private jet 2 days earlier than planned, the distant hum of the engines still vibrating faintly in his ears as his luxury car sped with effortless grace towards his sprawling mansion. He carried not only the weariness of transatlantic deals, meticulously brokered, but also the persistent, hollow ache that had resided in his chest since the heart-wrenching departure of his beloved wife, her life fading during the birth of their youngest child. His monumental success, a gleaming edifice of steel and intricate financial maneuvers, had become a meticulously constructed gilded cage for his grief, a relentless distraction from the profound emptiness that often threatened to engulf him in the quiet hours. He had, with a conviction born of both necessity and denial, convinced himself that providing an unshakable empire was the truest form of protection for his children, leaving the day-to-day warmth, the tender caresses and lullabies to Maria, their seemingly devoted housekeeper, a woman who had been a fixture in their lives even before his wife's passing, her presence a comforting constant. The mansion, usually a symphony of quiet, efficient activity during the day, or the delightful, unrestrained chatter of children in the late afternoon, was cloaked in an unsettling, almost suffocating silence that pricked David's skin the moment he crossed the threshold. The air, usually alive with the subtle scent of fresh flowers and gourmet meals, felt heavy, stagnant, a stark contrast to the crisp autumn breeze that had followed him indoors. There was no Maria to greet him with her usual deferential smile, her hands clasped politely, no Lily rushing down the grand, sweeping staircase, her long blonde hair a cascade of sunshine, her laughter a melody that could briefly chase away his shadows. A tight, cold knot of unease tightened in his stomach, a premonition he couldn't shake, as he ascended the polished marble steps, each footfall echoing the growing dread within him, amplifying the unnatural quiet. He found himself drawn not to his cavernous study, nor to the solitary comfort of his bedroom, but inexplicably to a faint, desperate whimpering that seemed to emanate from Lily's room. A sound so fragile, so utterly heartbroken, it pierced through his carefully constructed emotional armor, shattering its brittle surface. His hand trembled slightly, a rare display of vulnerability, as he reached Lily's ornate wooden door, pushing it gently, the soft creak sounding deafening in the stillness. It opened just enough to reveal a sliver of the scene within, a tableau that would forever scar the delicate fabric of his memory and redefine the very core of his existence. Maria, her back partially to him, stood over Lily, who was huddled on the plush rug, her small frame shaking uncontrollably, a picture of absolute terror. The housekeeper's face, usually a mask of gentle concern and maternal warmth, was now horribly twisted into a sinister, almost gleeful grin, a cold, cruel glint in her eyes that sent a shiver down David's spine as she held a pair of sharp, gleaming shears menacingly close to Lily's long, cherished blonde hair, the strands catching the afternoon light. David's blood ran cold, a searing shock coursing through his veins, his heart seizing in his chest with an intensity he hadn't felt since the devastating moment he learned of his wife's passing, a raw, visceral pain that eclipsed all other emotions. "Please, cleaner, don't cut my hair." Lily's voice, a mere whisper, cracked with an unbearable terror, tears streaming down her face, leaving glistening trails on her pale cheeks, her small body racked with sobs. Her small, delicate arm bore angry red marks, stark against her fair skin, evidence of a cruelty David could barely comprehend, a silent testament to suffering. Maria's cruel, mocking laughter, A sound utterly devoid of all warmth or humanity, echoed in the opulent room, a chilling counterpoint to Lily's desperate, heart-wrenching sobs. It was a sound that shattered the last vestiges of David's denial, ripping through the carefully constructed facade of his emotionally detached life, exposing the brutal truth. A primal roar erupted from his lungs, a sound born of pure, unadulterated fury, and a sudden, terrifying realization of his own profound failure and the urgent need for protection. Until Millionaire saw it and shouted, he bellowed, his voice a thunderous command that shook the very foundations of the house, his powerful frame bursting through the door, his eyes blazing with a protective fire he hadn't known he possessed, a dormant instinct now fully awakened. This horrifying tableau shattered David's carefully constructed world of denial, tearing apart the illusion of his controlled existence and the belief that his absence was justified. Maria's insidious abuse, a malevolent force driven by a twisted desire to punish David for his perceived indifference, for his wealth, and ultimately to secure control over his children's inheritance, was now undeniable, laid bare in the most brutal and shocking way imaginable. David, a man who had buried his grief in an empire of steel and finance, now felt an entirely different kind of collapse, not of markets or fortunes, but of his own soul, cracking under the weight of his guilt. He had been a distant, work-obsessed patriarch, believing his immense wealth was protection enough. But, in that pivotal moment, he transformed into a fierce, unwavering protector, battling not only Maria's manipulative web of deceit, but also his own crushing guilt over his past absence and emotional neglect. He had to learn to truly see his children, to understand the depth of their innocence and their desperate need for his unconditional love and presence. And in doing so, he would begin to see himself anew, shedding the suffocating shroud of grief that had blinded him for so long. The path forward, he knew with absolute certainty, would be fraught with daunting legal battles and profound emotional turmoil. But for Lily and his precious infant son, he would face every obstacle, every pain, with an unwavering resolve. The thunderous roar that tore from David's throat seemed to momentarily freeze Maria in place, her cruel grin dissolving into a mask of feigned shock and indignation, the shears clattering to the plush carpet with a soft thud. He was across the room in an instant, his powerful arms scooping Lily into a protective embrace, her small body trembling uncontrollably against his chest, her sobs echoing in the sudden, eerie quiet. He held her tightly, inhaling the scent of her hair, a mix of childish sweetness and the faint, unsettling odor of fear, his heart aching with a profound tenderness he hadn't allowed himself to feel in so long, a love that was fierce and raw and utterly overwhelming. His gaze, usually cool and calculating in the boardroom, now burned with an intensity that promised retribution, fixing on Maria as she scrambled to compose herself, her eyes darting nervously, searching for an escape from the palpable accusation that hung heavy in the air. Maria, ever the master of manipulation, quickly adopted her usual subservient demeanor, her voice laced with a practiced concern that grated against David's raw nerves. "Oh, Mr. Thorne," she began, her tone a carefully modulated blend of surprise and hurt. "I was merely trying to trim Lily's hair. It was getting so unruly. She insisted she didn't want it cut, but it was for her own good, you see." Her words, once so reassuring, now sounded like a hollow echo in David's ears, stripped bare of their former credibility, revealing the insidious deceit beneath. He looked down at Lily, whose small hands clutched his shirt desperately, her face buried against him, and then back at Maria, the image of her twisted smile and the shears an indelible stain on his mind, a stark contrast to the innocent explanation she offered. The angry red marks on Lily's arm, still vivid against her pale skin, screamed a different story, a silent testament to a hidden cruelty that had festered under his very roof, unnoticed by his preoccupied gaze. David's mind, once a fortress of facts and figures, now reeled with a torrent of questions, a crushing wave of guilt washing over him. He had been so blind, so utterly consumed by the empire he was building, convinced that his wealth was a shield, that Maria's presence was a balm for his children's wounds, a substitute for the warmth of their departed mother. He remembered the quiet, almost imperceptible shift in the household after his wife's passing, how Maria, initially a part-time helper, had seamlessly transitioned into a full-time fixture, her seemingly boundless energy and meticulous attention to detail a comforting presence during his own period of profound, isolating grief. She had been there for the birth of his son, a tiny, vulnerable life that had arrived amidst such sorrow, and had seemed to embrace the role of caregiver with an almost saintly devotion, earning his complete trust, a trust he now realized had been tragically misplaced. His infant son, barely a year old, lay sleeping peacefully in his nursery down the hall, a fragile beacon of innocence, utterly dependent on the adults around him. David's heart clenched, a new, terrifying fear blossoming within him for the defenseless boy, for both his children who had been left under the care of a woman capable of such a sinister display. He thought of the long hours he spent away, immersed in board meetings and international calls, leaving Lily and the baby largely to Maria's care, a decision that now felt like a gaping wound in his soul. He recalled fleeting moments of unease that he had dismissed as overactive imagination, Lily's sudden shyness, her reluctance to speak about her day, the occasional unexplained bruise he'd attributed to childish clumsiness, the way Maria would sometimes usher him away from the children's rooms with an almost too eager efficiency. He remembered the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in Lily's laughter, becoming less frequent, less bright, a melody slowly fading into a quiet hum. Maria, sensing David's silent fury, continued her performance, her voice softening, attempting to appeal to his sense of reason, her hands clasped together in a show of humility. "Mr. Thorne," she pleaded, her eyes glistening with what looked like genuine tears, "I have always cared for your children as if they were my own. You know how dedicated I have been, especially after your wife's departure. My only intention is their well-being." Her words were a carefully crafted shield, designed to deflect, to manipulate, to cling to the illusion of her unwavering loyalty. Yet, David now saw through the artifice, the layers of deceit peeling away to reveal a chilling emptiness behind her eyes, a calculating coldness that sent shivers down his spine. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that something far more sinister than a simple hair-trimming incident had been unfolding in his home. A silent, cruel drama playing out while he was away, blinded by his own grief and ambition. He had to uncover the truth, not just for Lily, but for the innocent baby boy, for the memory of his wife, and for the very soul of his fractured family. The thunderous roar that tore from David's throat seemed to momentarily freeze Maria in place, her cruel grin dissolving into a mask of feigned shock and indignation, the shears clattering to the plush carpet with a soft thud. He was across the room in an instant, his powerful arms scooping Lily into a protective embrace, her small body trembling uncontrollably against his chest, her sobs echoing in the sudden, eerie quiet. He held her tightly, inhaling the scent of her hair, a mix of childish sweetness and the faint, unsettling odor of fear, his heart aching with a profound tenderness he hadn't allowed himself to feel in so long, a love that was fierce and raw and utterly overwhelming. His gaze, usually cool and calculating in the boardroom, now burned with an intensity that promised retribution, fixing on Maria as she scrambled to compose herself, her eyes darting nervously, searching for an escape from the palpable accusation that hung heavy in the air. Maria, ever the master of manipulation, quickly adopted her usual subservient demeanor, her voice laced with a practiced concern that grated against David's raw nerves. "Oh, Mr. Thorne," she began, her tone a carefully modulated blend of surprise and hurt. "I was merely trying to trim Lily's hair. It was getting so unruly. She insisted she didn't want it cut, but it was for her own good, you see." Her words, once so reassuring, now sounded like a hollow echo in David's ears, stripped bare of their former credibility, revealing the insidious deceit beneath. He looked down at Lily, whose small hands clutched his shirt desperately, her face buried against him, and then back at Maria, the image of her twisted smile and the shears an indelible stain on his mind, a stark contrast to the innocent explanation she offered. The angry red marks on Lily's arm, still vivid against her pale skin, screamed a different story, a silent testament to a hidden cruelty that had festered under his very roof, unnoticed by his preoccupied gaze. David's mind, once a fortress of facts and figures, now reeled with a torrent of questions, a crushing wave of guilt washing over him. He had been so blind, so utterly consumed by the empire he was building, convinced that his wealth was a shield, that Maria's presence was a balm for his children's wounds, a substitute for the warmth of their departed mother. He remembered the quiet, almost imperceptible shift in the household after his wife's passing, how Maria, initially a part-time helper, had seamlessly transitioned into a full-time fixture, her seemingly boundless energy and meticulous attention to detail a comforting presence during his own period of profound, isolating grief. She had been there for the birth of his son, a tiny, vulnerable life that had arrived amidst such sorrow, and had seemed to embrace the role of caregiver with an almost saintly devotion, earning his complete trust, a trust he now realized had been tragically misplaced. His infant son, barely a year old, lay sleeping peacefully in his nursery down the hall, a fragile beacon of innocence, utterly dependent on the adults around him. David's heart clenched, a new, terrifying fear blossoming within him for the defenseless boy, for both his children who had been left under the care of a woman capable of such a sinister display. He thought of the long hours he spent away, immersed in board meetings and international calls, leaving Lily and the baby largely to Maria's care, a decision that now felt like a gaping wound in his soul. He recalled fleeting moments of unease that he had dismissed as overactive imagination, Lily's sudden shyness, her reluctance to speak about her day, the occasional unexplained bruise he'd attributed to childish clumsiness, the way Maria would sometimes usher him away from the children's rooms with an almost too eager efficiency. He remembered the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in Lily's laughter, becoming less frequent, less bright, a melody slowly fading into a quiet hum. Maria, sensing David's silent fury, continued her performance, her voice softening, attempting to appeal to his sense of reason, her hands clasped together in a show of humility. "Mr. Thorne," she pleaded, her eyes glistening with what looked like genuine tears, "I have always cared for your children as if they were my own. You know how dedicated I have been, especially after your wife's departure. My only intention is their well-being." Her words were a carefully crafted shield, designed to deflect, to manipulate, to cling to the illusion of her unwavering loyalty. Yet, David now saw through the artifice, the layers of deceit peeling away to reveal a chilling emptiness behind her eyes, a calculating coldness that sent shivers down his spine. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that something far more sinister than a simple hair-trimming incident had been unfolding in his home. A silent, cruel drama playing out while he was away, blinded by his own grief and ambition. He had to uncover the truth, not just for Lily, but for the innocent baby boy, for the memory of his wife, and for the very soul of his fractured family. David's voice, though still laced with a raw edge, was now controlled, a steely command that left no room for argument. "Maria," he stated, his gaze unwavering, "I will handle the children for now. You may attend to other duties in the main house, but you are not to approach Lily or the baby without my express permission." The dismissal hung heavy in the air, a stark revocation of her privileged position. Maria's face tightened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of resentment crossing her features before she dipped her head in a show of obedience, murmuring, "Of course, Mr. Thorne, as you wish." Her voice now devoid of its earlier feigned emotion, a flat, subservient tone that confirmed David's suspicions. As she retreated, her footsteps surprisingly light down the grand staircase, David felt a wave of cold dread wash over him, knowing he had merely postponed the inevitable confrontation, that this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. He spent the rest of the afternoon in Lily's room, holding her close, speaking in soft, reassuring tones, his own heart aching with every fresh sob that escaped her small chest. He noticed her flinching whenever a shadow moved across the room, her eyes darting nervously towards the door, as if expecting Maria to reappear. The angry red marks on her arm were more pronounced now, almost bruised, and as he gently examined her, he discovered faint, purplish smudges on her tiny wrist, as if she had been roughly grabbed. Later, when he went to check on his son, he found the baby unusually quiet, his eyes wide and watchful, clinging to David with an intensity that spoke of a deep-seated fear he shouldn't possess at such a tender age. The baby's cries, which had once been robust and demanding, had become more subdued, almost a whimper, a stark contrast to the healthy, joyful sounds he remembered from months past. These silent observations were bricks in a wall of terrifying realization, confirming his worst fears. That evening, after Lily had finally cried herself to sleep in his arms, and his son was settled in a crib beside his own bed, David began his meticulous search. He walked through the house, no longer seeing the opulent decor, but searching for hidden truths, for discrepancies. He noticed that the children's bathroom door had a new, small latch on the outside, a detail he had never noticed before, a chilling implication of confinement. He remembered his wife's meticulous nature, her habit of leaving small, encouraging notes in unexpected places, little treasures for him to find. He knew she would have been acutely aware of anything amiss. Her intuition, a finely tuned instrument. He began to search her old study, a room he had largely avoided since her departure, its contents a painful reminder of his loss. He ran his hand over her mahogany desk, a wave of profound sadness mixed with a fierce determination washing over him. It was there, tucked away in a hidden compartment of her antique writing desk, beneath a stack of old love letters, that his fingers brushed against a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with her distinct wax seal. His name was scrawled across it in her elegant hand. A letter from his wife, dated just weeks before their son's birth. A silent message from beyond the veil of his grief, a potential key to the dark secrets festering within his home. His heart pounded with a mixture of hope and dread, knowing that this fragile piece of paper might hold the truth he so desperately needed. A truth that could either shatter him completely or arm him with the unwavering courage required to protect his precious children. David's fingers, almost reverently, traced the elegant script of his name on the cream-colored envelope, a ghost of his wife's presence emanating from the delicate parchment, mingling with the faint, sweet scent of lavender and old paper that always clung to her personal effects. His heart, still pounding with a frantic rhythm against his ribs, seemed to hold its breath as he carefully broke the wax seal. the soft crackle echoing in the profound stillness of the study. He unfolded the single, densely written sheet, his eyes scanning the familiar handwriting, a wave of bittersweet emotion washing over him, a potent cocktail of grief for her loss, and a burgeoning hope for the truth. The letter began with tender words of love for him and their unborn child, a poignant reminder of the joy and anticipation that had been so tragically cut short. But as he read further, the tone shifted, a subtle undercurrent of unease weaving its way through her eloquent prose. His wife, with her keen intuition and sharp intellect, had expressed a growing disquiet about Maria's behavior in the weeks leading up to her departure. She wrote of Maria's increasing possessiveness over Lily, often subtly dismissing David's attempts to spend time with their daughter, or fabricating reasons why Lily was unavailable. There were mentions of small, inexplicable bruises on Lily's arms and legs, always attributed by Maria to innocent tumbles or clumsy play. But his wife had noted Lily's unusual silence when questioned, her eyes often darting towards Maria with a fear that now, in retrospect, chilled David to the bone. More disturbingly, the letter detailed Maria's peculiar, almost obsessive interest in the family's financial affairs, her casual questions about bank accounts, inheritance clauses, and even the details of David's life insurance policy, inquiries that had struck his wife as deeply inappropriate and unsettling. She had written of her intention to discreetly investigate Maria further after the baby's arrival, a premonition of danger that now felt like a desperate plea from beyond, a warning he had been too consumed by his own sorrow to heed. A cold, hard knot tightened in David's stomach, the pieces of a terrifying puzzle beginning to snap into place with a horrifying clarity. The quiet house, Lily's withdrawn demeanor, the baby's subdued cries, the angry marks on Lily's arm, Maria's twisted smile, and now this letter. It all coalesced into an undeniable portrait of insidious abuse and calculated manipulation. His wife's words were not just a confession of her unease, but a beacon, illuminating the dark corners of his home, demanding action. A fierce, protective rage, unlike anything he had ever known, surged through him, burning away the last vestiges of his guilt and self-pity, replacing them with an unwavering resolve. He would not only protect his children, but would also honor his wife's memory by uncovering every single truth, no matter how painful, and bringing to light the darkness that had festered under his very roof. The following days became a blur of intense, covert activity for David. He moved with a quiet purpose, his mind, once focused on the intricate dance of global finance, now entirely consumed by the safety of his children and the unmasking of Maria. He discreetly installed surveillance equipment in key areas of the mansion. Tiny, almost invisible cameras and audio recorders that would capture every interaction, every whispered word, every veiled threat. He spent hours poring over household ledgers and bank statements, scrutinizing every transaction, every expense, immediately noticing a pattern of unexplained withdrawals and suspicious purchases, small amounts at first, escalating over time, all authorized by Maria under the guise of household necessities, yet clearly funneling into accounts unknown to him. He found a hidden compartment in Maria's personal belongings, revealing a trove of documents, forged receipts, copies of his wife's will, and even carefully doctored letters attempting to grant Maria power of attorney over certain family assets, all meticulously gathered, a chilling testament to her long-game strategy of deceit and greed. Amidst this relentless investigation, David prioritized his children above all else. He spent every possible moment with Lily, holding her close, reading her favorite stories, playing gentle games, slowly coaxing hesitant smiles from her trembling lips. He watched her, truly watched her, noticing the subtle flinches, the way she would sometimes shrink from his touch before leaning into it, the deep-seated fear in her eyes that slowly, miraculously, began to soften with each passing hour of his unwavering presence. With his infant son, David rediscovered the tender joys of fatherhood, holding the baby close, murmuring soft words, feeling the tiny hand grip his finger, a profound connection blossoming between them. He became the primary caregiver, ensuring the baby was fed, changed, and comforted, noticing how the baby's cries slowly regained their robust strength, how his eyes sparkled with a newfound curiosity and contentment, a stark contrast to the subdued child he had found just days before. Maria, though confined to her general duties, seemed to sense the shift in David, her practiced subservience now laced with a subtle tension, a barely perceptible flicker of defiance in her eyes. She would occasionally attempt to approach the children, her voice dripping with feigned concern, only to be met by David's steely gaze and a quiet, firm redirection. She tried to regain control of the household narrative, subtly complaining about the children's unruly behavior or David's overprotective nature to other, minor staff members, attempting to sow seeds of doubt. But David had already taken steps to ensure her influence was contained, her power dismantled. He knew this was merely the calm before the storm, the quiet gathering of forces before the inevitable, explosive confrontation that would shatter the fragile peace of his home and bring the hidden darkness into the unforgiving light of day. He was ready for it, armed with his wife's truth, his children's innocence, and a father's unyielding love. The digital eyes and ears David had so carefully placed throughout his home became a horrifying window into the hidden torment his children had endured, a stark, unblinking record of Maria's insidious cruelty. He spent sleepless nights hunched over screens in his private study, the only light emanating from the glowing monitors illuminating his grim, resolute face as he watched hours of footage, each passing minute twisting a new knot of pain and fury in his gut. The recordings painted a chilling portrait of Maria's true nature, her voice, once so seemingly gentle, now a sharp, venomous whisper as she belittled Lily, telling her she was unwanted, a burden, a clumsy girl who always disappointed her father. He saw her deliberately ignore Lily's pleas for food or comfort, leaving the little girl to cry herself to sleep in her room, the sound of her innocent sobs echoing hollowly in the otherwise silent recordings. There were countless instances of Maria roughly grabbing Lily's arm, the same arm where David had seen the angry red marks, or pushing her away with a dismissive shove when the child sought attention. Each action a silent testament to the emotional and subtle physical abuse that had become Lily's daily reality. The footage of his infant son was equally devastating. David watched Maria neglect the baby's cries, leaving him in his crib for extended periods, his small, distressed whimpers slowly fading into a weary silence. He saw her handle the baby with a cold, almost detached efficiency, lacking any warmth or tender touch, the very antithesis of the loving care a vulnerable infant so desperately needed. There were moments when Maria would intentionally place the baby's bottle just out of his reach, watching with a cruel smile as the tiny arms flailed in frustration, a perverse amusement in her eyes. The surveillance also confirmed his financial suspicions with undeniable clarity, showing Maria meticulously sifting through his personal mail, making hushed, clandestine phone calls in empty rooms, and even attempting to access his secure home office late at night, her face a mask of desperate greed, illuminated by the faint glow of her phone. The sheer breadth of her deception, the calculated malice behind her seemingly benign facade, was a cold, hard truth that settled deep in David's bones, solidifying his resolve to bring her reign of terror to an end. As David continued his relentless investigation, Maria, sensing the shifting sands beneath her feet, grew increasingly desperate, her practiced composure beginning to fray at the edges. She knew David was watching, though she couldn't pinpoint how. and her attempts to regain control became more overt, more brazen. She tried to turn Lily against her father, whispering insidious untruths to the little girl, telling her that David was angry with her, that he didn't truly care, that he preferred to be alone with his work rather than with his children. But Lily, slowly healing under David's constant, unwavering presence and genuine affection, no longer absorbed Maria's venom. Instead, she would look at her father with a newfound trust, her small hand instinctively reaching for his, finding solace in his touch. Maria also made attempts to subtly sabotage David's efforts to care for the children, hiding their favorite toys, misplacing feeding schedules, or accidentally leaving crucial baby supplies out of reach, all designed to make David's new role seem overwhelming and to subtly undermine his confidence, hoping he would retreat to his previous distant self and reinstate her full authority. One evening, David walked into the kitchen to find Maria standing over Lily, a chillingly familiar glint in her eyes, a small, silver locket clutched in her hand. A locket that had belonged to David's wife, a cherished keepsake Lily always wore. Maria was telling Lily that she had to give the locket to her, that it was too precious for a clumsy child, that she would keep it safe for her. Lily's eyes, wide with fear and a deep sadness, were fixed on the locket, her small body trembling. David's voice, a low, dangerous rumble, cut through the tense silence. "Maria," he said, his eyes burning with an icy fire, "that locket belongs to Lily. Return it to her immediately." Maria flinched, her hand tightening around the locket, a flicker of defiance in her eyes, but the sheer force of David's presence, the unyielding authority in his voice, compelled her. With a resentful sigh, she dropped the locket into Lily's outstretched hand, her gaze lingering on David with a hatred that was no longer veiled. This incident, coupled with the overwhelming evidence he had meticulously gathered, was the final catalyst. David knew he could no longer delay. The time for subtle observation was over. It was time for decisive action. He spent the next day in a whirlwind of focused calls, consulting with his most trusted legal team, presenting them with the irrefutable evidence: his wife's letter, the detailed financial discrepancies, the forged documents, and the horrifying, unedited surveillance footage. His lawyers, initially skeptical of such a grand deception, grew increasingly appalled as they reviewed the material, their faces hardening with outrage. There was no doubt in their minds, nor in David's, that Maria's actions constituted not only severe child abuse, but also a calculated long-term scheme of fraud and attempted theft. The path forward was clear, though daunting: a formal resolution, a confrontation in the unforgiving light of the legal system, where truth would be the ultimate weapon and justice would finally be served. David knew it would be a painful journey, but looking at Lily, now sleeping soundly in her own bed, a faint, contented smile on her lips, and hearing the soft, healthy gurgles of his baby son from the next room, he knew he would face it all with an unwavering heart, fueled by the boundless strength of a father's unconditional love. The legal maelstrom began with a chilling swiftness, drawing David and his fractured family into the austere, intimidating embrace of the courtroom, a place where truth was meticulously dissected and justice, hopefully, served. The very air in the grand hall of justice felt heavy, thick with unspoken accusations and the palpable tension of opposing wills. David sat upright, his usual calm demeanor now infused with a fierce, protective energy, his gaze unwavering as he looked across the room at Maria. She sat beside her own legal counsel, her face a carefully constructed mask of innocent bewilderment, her eyes wide and seemingly tear-filled as she occasionally glanced at him, attempting to convey a sense of betrayal, a desperate plea for understanding. But David saw through it all, the chilling emptiness behind her theatrical performance now glaringly obvious, illuminated by the cold, hard light of the evidence he possessed. He felt Lily's small hand instinctively reach for his beneath the table, her fingers intertwining with his, a silent anchor in the turbulent sea of legal jargon and formal proceedings, a constant reminder of why he was there, why he would fight with every fiber of his being. Maria's lawyer, a slick, experienced professional with a voice as smooth as polished stone, began by painting a picture of a devoted, long-suffering housekeeper, a woman who had selflessly stepped into the void left by David's wife, dedicating her life to nurturing his motherless children, while he, the wealthy, distant patriarch, remained emotionally unavailable, consumed by his empire. He argued that David, consumed by grief and perhaps an inability to cope with the demands of fatherhood, was now unjustly maligning Maria, fabricating accusations out of a profound sense of guilt and a desire to deflect responsibility. He suggested that the marks on Lily were merely the inevitable bumps and scrapes of a playful child, and that any financial discrepancies were simply clerical errors, easily explained by the complexities of managing a large estate. Maria nodded solemnly, her performance flawless, her eyes welling up with what appeared to be genuine sorrow, a master manipulator playing her final, desperate hand. The narrative she wove was compelling, almost believable, threatening to cast a shadow of doubt over David's unwavering conviction. But David's legal team, armed with the irrefutable truth, was prepared. They began by presenting the financial evidence, a meticulous breakdown of the unexplained withdrawals, the suspicious purchases, and the forged documents, all meticulously tied to Maria's actions. The sheer volume and systematic nature of the financial manipulation chipped away at Maria's facade of innocence, her eyes darting nervously as the numbers flashed across the screens, each figure a damning indictment of her greed. Then came the heart of the matter, the emotional core of their case, David's wife's letter. The lawyer read excerpts from it, his voice resonating with a quiet power, detailing her growing unease, her observations of Maria's possessiveness, her premonitions of danger, a mother's intuition speaking from beyond the grave. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, the poignancy of the words, the tragedy of a warning unheeded, settling heavily in the room. The most devastating blow came with the presentation of the surveillance footage. The screens in the courtroom flickered to life, displaying snippets of the chilling reality David had painstakingly uncovered. The cold, venomous whispers directed at Lily, the deliberate neglect of the baby's cries, the rough handling of Lily's arm, the cruel smile as she withheld a toy, the insidious attempts to manipulate Lily against her father. Each clip played out in stark, unblinking clarity, stripping away Maria's carefully constructed image of devotion. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the muffled sobs of a few onlookers, their faces etched with horror and disgust. Lily, nestled close to David, instinctively buried her face in his side during the more difficult moments, her small body trembling, but David held her firmly, whispering words of comfort, a silent promise of protection that resonated through the room. The red marks on her arm, now faded but still faintly visible, served as a living testament to the cruelty captured on screen. As the final damning clip faded from the screens, revealing Maria's attempt to steal his wife's locket from Lily, a raw, guttural sound erupted from Maria's throat, a sound utterly devoid of her earlier feigned composure. Her eyes, no longer shimmering with tears of innocence, blazed with a terrifying, unbridled fury, her carefully maintained mask finally shattering into 1,000 pieces. She lunged forward, restrained only by her bewildered lawyer, her voice rising to a shrill, piercing scream that echoed through the silent courtroom. "You think you're so high and mighty, mister." "Thorne!" she shrieked, her face contorted with a venomous hatred. "Always too busy for your own family, too good for the likes of me. I gave everything, and you gave nothing." She ranted, revealing a twisted tapestry of resentment and perceived slights. Her words a torrent of long-held bitterness about her life, her struggles, and the glaring disparity between her meager existence and the opulent world of the Thorns. She had believed she deserved their wealth, their comfort, their lives, and had sought to claim it through insidious means, punishing the children for the father's perceived indifference, for a wealth she felt was unjustly theirs. The outburst, raw and unfiltered, confirmed every accusation, every fear, painting a horrifying picture of a soul consumed by envy and a profound, destructive rage, leaving no room for doubt about the depths of her malice. The judge's gavel, when it finally fell, echoed through the stunned silence of the courtroom like a pronouncement from fate itself, a sharp, decisive crack that sealed Maria's grim destiny. Her piercing screams and venomous accusations had done more to condemn her than any prosecutor's closing statement, laying bare the twisted depths of her malice for all to witness. The verdict was swift and unequivocal, a testament to the irrefutable evidence David had so painstakingly gathered, a triumph of truth over deception. Maria, her face still contorted with impotent rage, was led away, her desperate struggle and bitter curses fading into the corridors of justice, leaving behind a palpable sense of relief, a collective exhale from those who had borne witness to her cruelty. David held Lily close, her small hand still gripping his, her trembling now slowly subsiding, replaced by the quiet comfort of his unwavering presence. He looked at her, truly looked at her, seeing not just the lingering shadows of fear, but also the nascent flicker of hope in her eyes, a fragile light that he vowed to nurture with every fiber of his being. The weight that had pressed down on his chest for so long, the crushing burden of guilt and sorrow, began to lift, replaced by a fierce, cleansing resolve. Returning home, the sprawling mansion, once a gilded cage of his grief, and Maria's insidious machinations, now felt different, imbued with a fresh, fragile promise. The silence that had once haunted its halls, a chilling echo of his wife's absence and Lily's suppressed cries, was slowly being filled with the gentle sounds of a family rediscovering itself. David immediately dismissed the remaining staff, except for a trusted elderly couple who had served his family for decades, ensuring that no shadow of Maria's influence remained. He spent the following days and weeks entirely devoted to his children, shedding the remnants of his work-obsessed persona like an old skin. He bathed Lily, gently washing her long blonde hair, the very hair Maria had threatened, telling her how beautiful and strong she was, his fingers tracing the faint, almost invisible scars on her arm with a tender, protective touch. He watched her play, truly engaging with her, laughing at her silly jokes, building towering castles of blocks that inevitably toppled, their joyful crashes echoing through the once somber rooms. The baby, too, blossomed under David's constant, loving care. His cries, once subdued and weary, now erupted with robust demands for attention, his tiny hands reaching out with uninhibited joy for David's face. David learned the rhythm of his son's needs, the subtle nuances of his gurgles and coos, feeling an overwhelming surge of paternal love that had been dormant for too long, smothered by his grief. He would often hold both children close, Lily nestled against one shoulder, the baby cradled in the crook of his arm, their warmth a tangible anchor in his world, a balm to his wounded soul. He read to them, sang to them, and simply sat with them, allowing the quiet power of his presence to speak volumes, slowly rebuilding the fractured trust, weaving new threads of affection and security into the delicate fabric of their lives. Lily, initially hesitant, began to share her fears, her small voice whispering stories of Maria's unkindness, of the loneliness she had felt, and David listened, his heart aching with every word, but also swelling with pride at her courage, her resilience. He rearranged the house, transforming Lily's room into a vibrant sanctuary filled with colorful toys and books, a safe haven where laughter could thrive. The baby's nursery, too, was infused with warmth and light, a stark contrast to the sterile environment Maria had maintained. David removed all traces of his previous life, the stacks of business reports, the endless phone calls, the late nights in the study, replacing them with family photos, children's drawings, and the simple, profound joy of shared moments. He rediscovered the simple pleasure of preparing meals, his kitchen, once rarely used, now filled with the comforting aromas of home-cooked food, Lily often by his side, helping him stir and mix with clumsy, enthusiastic hands. These were not merely tasks. They were rituals of reconnection, acts of love, each one a brick in the foundation of their new life, rebuilding not just a home, but a family, stronger and more deeply bound by the truth they had faced and the love they were now courageously embracing. The shadows of the past still lingered, faint and distant, but they were steadily receding, replaced by the burgeoning light of hope and the unwavering promise of a future forged in unconditional love. The journey of healing was long, but each day brought them closer, a testament to the enduring power of a father's love and a child's capacity for forgiveness. 2 years had softly unfurled since the courtroom's harsh light had illuminated Maria's cruelty, and the Thorne mansion, once a place of silent sorrow and hidden torment, now vibrated with the vibrant symphony of a truly lived family life. David, no longer a man adrift in his grief, walked through its sun-drenched rooms with a lightness in his step, his heart brimming with a love that had blossomed from the ashes of his past. Lily, now a bright and confident 8-year-old, her long blonde hair flowing freely, chased butterflies through the sprawling garden, her laughter echoing with an uninhibited joy that was a balm to David's soul. She would often pull him by the hand to show him a newly sprouted flower or a particularly interesting bug, her eyes sparkling with curiosity, completely free from the shadows that had once dimmed their light. Her small, once trembling hands now confidently held a watering can, nurturing the very plants David had once tended to with a detached sense of duty, now a shared ritual of growth and renewal. His son, a sturdy and boisterous toddler of 2, toddled after them, his own cherubic giggles mingling with Lily's, his small, insistent voice calling out for his father, a constant, joyful reminder of the future they were building. David would scoop him up, burying his face in the soft, sweet-smelling hair, feeling the pure, unconditional love that surged through him, a powerful current that had washed away the last vestiges of his old, empty life. Family meals, once silent and strained, were now boisterous affairs, filled with stories from Lily's school day, the baby's playful shouts, and David's gentle, attentive presence. He had traded boardrooms for bedtime stories, stock reports for scraped knees, and the cold logic of finance for the warm, irrational, beautiful chaos of fatherhood. The house itself seemed to breathe easier, its grand spaces filled not with expensive silence, but with the clatter of toys, the scent of home-cooked meals, and the joyous sounds of children thriving, a true testament to the healing power of truth and love. The scars of the past remained, faint reminders of a dark chapter, but they were now overshadowed by the vibrant tapestry of their present, woven with threads of resilience, forgiveness, and an unbreakable bond. David often thought of his wife, not with the crushing weight of sorrow that had once defined his existence, but with a quiet, profound gratitude. Her final letter, a beacon in his darkest hour, had not only saved their children, but had also guided him back to himself, to the father he was always meant to be. He had learned that true strength lay not in material wealth or professional triumph, but in the fierce, unwavering protection of those you love. in the courage to confront injustice, and in the boundless capacity for compassion. The journey had been arduous, marked by pain and profound self-reflection, but it had led them to this moment of profound peace, a future built on honesty, courage, and the pure, unyielding power of unconditional love. What would you do to protect a child? What lengths would you go to ensure their safety and happiness? Share your thoughts below. And remember, every act of kindness, every stand for truth, contributes to a world where love can truly heal all wounds. Let this story be a reminder that evil will be punished, good will be rewarded, and justice is always built with truth, courage, and unconditional love.